Let's start with the vice presidential debate last night, a debate that really taught us nothing about these candidates, nothing that we didn't already know about these candidates and their positions. But there were some highlights. There were some lowlights. There were some things that were said right away at the beginning of the debate last night around coronavirus. I think this is the most telling part of the evening for the administration, the Trump administration, their inability to have a clear, concise response to coronavirus. Over the past number of months, of course, President Trump has been criticized for the lack of leadership on the coronavirus issue, turning a blind eye back at the end of January into February. That's been the biggest criticism. The number one issue on the mind of voters this morning is coronavirus. And it's not just a virus. It's tied to a stimulus. It's tied to the economy. It's tied to jobs. Coronavirus is the number one issue for voters right now. What is the response? So this was the first question last night. And I think Senator Harris, I mean, if this is all the debate you watched last night, this just underlined your thoughts about the Trump administration's response to this virus. Watch Kamala Harris's first answer last night on the Trump administration's response to coronavirus, and what they would do differently was the question.
We are looking at over 30 million people who in the last several months had to file for unemployment. And here's the thing. On January 28th, the vice president and the president were informed about the nature of this pandemic. They were informed that it's lethal in consequence, that it is airborne, that it will affect young people, and that it would be contracted because it is airborne. And they knew what was happening, and they didn't tell you.
So what exactly is she referring to? Well, of course, she's referring to the fact that we knew about this, that the president knew about it, knew that it was deadlier than the flu, and yet didn't tell the American people about it. Downplayed it. In fact, in some places lied about it, and also called it a Democratic hoax. He didn't call the virus itself a hoax. He called it their new hoax, Democratic hoax. And if you need some refresher on this, here's what he told Bob Woodward back in February on the phone during the interviews about this coronavirus.
You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. This is more deadly. This is 5 per, this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%, so this is deadly stuff.
Yeah, so that's at the beginning of February, not even at the end of February, and at the same time calling it a hoax. Well, Vice President Pence tried to respond to that, and he kept saying, I just want to underscore the strength of the American people, And he was almost like trying to say that the Democrats or that Kamala Harris was trying to downplay the strength and resiliency of the American people, which is, I don't know where that came from, but I guess when you have no other leg to stand on, that's where you go. So here's the vice president's response to the coronavirus.
Our nation has gone through a very challenging time this year. But I want the American people to know that from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first.
So, yeah, he's put, do you feel, I'm just going to ask you flat out, do you feel that President Trump has had an adequate response to the coronavirus? Just let me know in the chat. Do you think this administration has had an adequate response to the coronavirus? Have they really been out front and leading on this at a national level? Ms. Harris, for her point, tried to hold the Trump administration responsible for it, for the failure to stem the coronavirus, criticizing Pence, who leads the White House task force, of course. So he's out there. He's the guy. He's the guy that President Trump put in charge of this response. And yet in the past week, we've seen a surge in cases in a number of states across the country. And as we head into the fall, with no national mandate on anything, you're seeing restaurants having to close back down again and a surge in cases. And young people, we're seeing an outbreak at colleges. Oh, reopen. That was the answer. We had a lot of people last night, or a lot of questions that were asked that just didn't get answered. So there was a slew of these. I don't know how many of you watched last night, but it's so frustrating to me as a viewer. I'm sitting there and the moderator asks a question, and instead of answering the question, you say, before I answer that, I'm just going to go back to the thing you said previously. Of course, this was wildly mocked with Sarah Palin a few years ago. She didn't answer any questions that were put to her. And then famously, she was made fun of on Saturday Night Live, where Tina Fey got out a flute and started playing it. She's like, I'm not going to answer your question, but I will play you this flute. But last night, there was a lot of this unanswered questions. Specifically, Mr. Pence and Mrs. Harris didn't answer a question about whether they have spoken to their running mates about their age and sort of a succession plan. You know, Joe Biden's 78, President Trump's 74, who just got out of the hospital because of coronavirus. Have you had any discussions with them about a succession of power? What's a plan there? If they are incapacitated, will they write up a letter at the hospital and give you the power of the presidency under the 25th Amendment? Has that discussion come up? Neither of them could answer that, or didn't answer that, refused to answer that. Later on, Pence didn't answer a question about the Trump administration and how they would protect pre-existing conditions, of course, because the Affordable Care Act is being tackled right now at the courts, and it's going to be up against the Supreme Court very soon. And so if that gets thrown out, cast down, what will happen to people with pre-existing conditions? And by the way, coronavirus is now considered a pre-existing condition because of its effect on the heart and lungs and your ability to breathe. And there's also data that shows lasting brain damage in patients. Pre-existing conditions. He didn't answer that question. Vice President also pressed Harris on whether Biden would push to add more Supreme Court justices, the packing of the court, right? The idea that we have 9 justices now, would a Biden administration just add more chairs to the Supreme Court bench, which they can do? Would they pack the court? She wouldn't answer that question. He asked her again, and he said, I just want to, for the record, say that she didn't answer that question. Great. To which I was thinking as a viewer, there are about 5 questions you didn't answer tonight, one of which was about Indiana on abortion. What would you do in the state of Indiana? What would you want your state to do in Indiana if Roe v. Wade is overturned? He didn't answer that question. Kamala Harris didn't answer that question about California on abortion. So there was a lot of unanswered questions last night. The moderator, I think, did a decent job. Didn't manage to cut people off as much as she could have. She could have, when Vice President Pence, we now know the numbers. We've looked at the total numbers of interruptions and people who spoke the longest. Vice President Pence spoke way more than Kamala Harris and interrupted way more. You know, if I'm the moderator, I might say, thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And he keeps talking. I'd say, all right, Senator Harris, I want to ask you this question now. And I just would talk over him. That's what I would do. That's what I used to do when I would interview. And then it would shut that person up. Same thing you could do to her. Thank you, Senator Harris. Thank you, Senator Harris. I got it, Senator Harris. Okay, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Vice President, I hear you. So we're going to ask you this question. That'll just shut him up. But all in all, it was definitely, there was more decorum last night, side by side with plexiglass, than there was during the last week's debate. We learned, of course, just a few minutes ago that the next debate between President Trump and Vice President Biden will take place virtually. That's right. It's not going to be in person. They will do it virtually. We're still getting details exactly how that's going to come about and how that technology will work. I imagine it'll be sort of over Zoom or something. It's going to be fascinating to watch. The first virtual debate in presidential history. It's a sign of the times. Why don't we have a virtual presidential debate at this point, right? Everyone else is doing it. These guys can do it. And that way, maybe we can mute each other's microphones, throughout. But I would love to see like some disruptions in the background, right? Like Jill Biden walks in with a plate of cookies. Like, oh, Joe, I'm sorry. You're doing that debate thing tonight? I'm sorry. Well, I brought you a cup of coffee and some warm cookies, Joe. And I'd love to see Don Jr. walking in the background interrupting. Oh, Daddy, I'm sorry. Get out of here, Donnie. Doing a little thing right now? I'd like to see that. So there was another big moment to me last night that I thought Kamala Harris and the Biden camp, they just can't answer this question. They can't answer this question, and it's a damn shame on the environment. I think if you are looking for an administration that's going to be strong progressively on the environment, is going to put into place a series of regulations that President Trump unraveled on fossil fuels, on fracking, clean energy, clean water, or just getting behind a massive Green New Deal that's really a big, giant, wet kiss in a lot of regards for these billionaire green energy tycoons. If you were looking for clear answers on fracking last night, you didn't get them. Or, here's what I wanted last night. I wish, and it's not going to happen, but I wish that Vice President Pence would have said, you're against fracking. You don't want fracking. You want to end fracking. And instead of this dance around the fracking question, I would have said, fracking is not good. And we would like to roll this back completely. And we are going to take giant steps over the next few years to eliminate it. It's a hard thing to do overnight. It's a hard thing to eliminate in one fell swoop of a pen. And could cite example after example in upstate Pennsylvania and other places where groundwater is being destroyed, families' drinking sources are being destroyed, filled with chemicals. Patients with burns all over their body because of the chemicals that they're dealing with fracking. And these companies that run roughshod over the American people, over the American landscape, and these low-income people that live nearby, these factories have no recourse. Can't do anything about it. But they were totally weak on this question. So Vice President Pence went after Kamala Harris on the question of fracking last night. And instead of taking the opposite direction, maybe a more progressive direction, they're basically taking the Trump administration direction, which is we're not going to end fracking.
Economy. What's remarkable is the United States has reduced CO2 more than the countries that are still in the Paris Climate Accord, but we've done it through innovation. And we've done it through natural gas and fracking, which, Senator, the American people can go look at the record. I know Joe Biden says otherwise now, as you do, but the both of you repeatedly committed to abolishing fossil fuel and banning fracking. And so...
She's shaking her head no. Yeah, they did. They had already committed to getting rid of fracking. When it could win you the primary... when you could go up against Bernie Sanders, who wants to eliminate this, who wants to eliminate these types of fossil fuels, which are contributing to climate change in a massive way. Vice President Pence, for his point, he talked about good for him. He mentioned the climate is changing, which in many ways is more than the rest of his administration does. He said, yes, the climate is changing. We will defer to science on that. Really? Wow. When's that going to happen? We're going to defer to science. We're going to listen to science. And then President Trump 2 weeks ago out in California during the wildfires, when confronted about, the science shows what's happening, he says science doesn't know. Science doesn't know. Yeah, science doesn't know. Maybe tell that to your president, Mr. Vice President. But on this question of fracking, here was her answer, and it's pretty darn weak.
Sure. So first of all, I will repeat, and the American people know, that Joe Biden will not ban fracking. That is a fact. That is a fact. I will repeat that Joe Biden has been very clear that he thinks about growing jobs, which is why he will not increase taxes for anyone who makes less than $400,000 a year. Joe Biden's economic plan, Moody's, which is a reputable Wall Street firm, has said will create 7 million more jobs than Donald Trump's. And part of those jobs that will be created by Joe Biden are going to be about clean energy and renewable energy.
Making what? Making windmills? Solar farms? I want to say it again, a fact. even though I supported the Green New Deal, even though I support getting rid of fracking, I'm falling in the company line because we're scared of losing our donor money to all these fracking companies and big business, big energy. Most Americans do not support fracking. Overwhelmingly, they don't. We see the environmental degradation that it causes. Have some guts. You were up there to be able to say, I'm talking, Mr. Vice President. It's my turn to talk. No. So if you were hoping for an about face on any kind of meaningful legislation on the environment or position on the environment from the Biden camp, don't count on it. So when I sit here and say, and you maybe want to criticize me for it, that's fine. When I say these parties are virtually the same, you just watch that. You just watch that happen. She supported a Green New Deal. She supported ending fracking. So did Vice President Biden. He would look right in a voter's face and tell them, I'm going to end fracking. I'm going to end our dependency on fossil fuels. By the way, that's what all climate scientists say we need to do to help try to at least stop and start to roll back this warming that's taking place across the world. But not because your big donors are throwing money at you. So you're able to just stand there and say, it's a fact. We will not eliminate this.
The Green New Deal. You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Sure. So first of all, I will repeat, and the American people know, that Joe Biden will not ban fracking. That is a fact. That is a fact.
Okay, but that's not what you were saying a few months ago, and that's not been your position. What changed? Wake up. What has changed? I'll tell you what's changed. Big donors threatened you. That's what happened. That's what changed. So, big takeaways of the night. We didn't learn very much from the vice presidential debate, unfortunately. Positions not changed much. The vice president, President Trump came out and tweeted, Mike Pence won big. And then Vice President Biden came out, Kamala Harris, you made us all proud tonight. And then because of the fly that was landing on Vice President Pence's head for 2 minutes straight, there was all these fly memes that took place last night. And then the Biden camp rolled out their own fly swatter for sale, selling truth over flies on their website. They sold out in a matter of minutes, these fly swatters. So there you go. That's a look at the debate last night.